On Wednesday, December 7th, 2024, City Lights, together with the Jerome Rothenberg Estate and the University of California Press, presented a program titled Technicians of the Sacred, a tribute to the life and work of Jerome Rothenberg. Jerome Rothenberg passed away in April of 2024. He was deeply mourned by many in the literary community and beyond. City Lights' friendship and long-standing relationship to Jerome Rothenberg took the form of some wonderful collaborations over the years. We had the distinct pleasure of hosting him many times, whether it was for his wonderful musical duet with master bassist Bert Turetsky during our Dada World Fair, or for his many reading duets with the late Michael McClure, or simple reading his work solo. Mr. Rothenberg always brought joy to our halls, and it is a great honor to be able to pay tribute to the lasting legacy that he has left behind and in his memory. Jerome Rothenberg was an internationally celebrated poet, translator, anthologist, and performer with over 90 books of poetry and 12 assemblages of traditional and avant-garde poetry, such as the influential Technicians of the Sacred, Shaking the Pumpkin, and the 5-volume Poems for the Millennium. He was a founding figure of ethnopoetics as a combination of poetic practice and theory, and was a longtime practitioner and theorist of poetry performance. His influence upon successive generations of writers, poets, artists, and musicians is apparent to us here at City Lights. He walked in many worlds and brought insight, wisdom, and enthusiasm with him wherever he went. A mentor to many, he leaves behind a body of work that has been hugely influential. The poets brought together for this event all had a very deep connection to Mr. Rothenberg and his work. Appearing on this program was Matthew Rothenberg, Gary Gach, Robert Haas, Brenda Hillman, Amy McClure, Michael Palmer, Ariel Resnikoff, Andrew Schelling, and Eleni Stecopoulos. We hope you enjoy it.
I thought that it was appropriate also to start with a few poems from my dad's actual first book of poetry. Also, another connection to City Lights was he was part of the Pocket Poets series, number 11, and this was the New Young German Poets, who included Paul Celan, Günter Grass, Helmut Heisenbüttel, and Hans Magnus Enzensberger. So I thought I'd read a few short pieces from here, just to kind of set the stage, take us back to 1959. So this is from Heisenbüttel, tautological. The shadow that I cast is the shadow that I cast. The position at which I have arrived is the position at which I have arrived. The position at which I have arrived is yes and no. Situation, my special situation. Group after group goes wild over blank surfaces. Group after group goes wild over pure colors. Group over group goes wild over pure so-and-so. The shadow that I cast is pure so-and-so. Group after group goes wild over the shadow that I cast and disappears. Then I thought that I would do, what did I think I would do? I grabbed a few real quick here, some of my favorites. So yeah, this is Enzensberger, A Parting. Let the sky between you and me be cut into shreds, and the white flag cut into shreds, in which we wrapped ourselves in sleep, grafted so gently to each other, and the future blossoming upon us. When all at once it's Monday. Let the wind appear and brush the memory of greenness from our crowns. Let the snow appear and no smoke above the house. And time cut into shreds and a sky that vomits, cold enduring ashes whirls around your head, slowly curls around my head, the snow cut into shreds. So that's early Rothenberg. This is stuff, I don't know how much biography I need to provide, but as a Jewish kid in the army, he assimilated German and used that army time to meet all these folks and brought that back. So like going now sort of into the future. I wanted to read a couple of selections from The Stars in Mindless Space, A Deeper Image. Now, this is a collection that my father worked on. It's going to be the last thing that he actually directly worked on that's going to come out from the university in Rouen and Le Havre. It's a collection of his late poems, and don't worry about it. So I thought I would start by reading. Robert Kelly did a very nice memorial when we performed in New York. He wasn't able to join us, but he memorialized my father very, very, very nicely. And I thought it would be nice to respond with this coda to a book of dreams for Robert Kelly. No world more clear than what we see in dreams, nor more amazing. Numbers bursting into stars, and stars enriching what we learn when dreaming. It is no more than this, to sleep and be the master of the universe, not to be bound to earth, but gathering a trillion other worlds, to count myself a little king stepping aside for time. Nothing is measured that the mind can fathom waking, in the way her body beckons when you turn to touch her, coming from a black hole deep in space and time. We learn to count the deeper images, and those still deeper, gods and angels dancing on a pin, a chip. Before the dream turns bad, in which a pin, chip, holds all we know and all we fear. I stretch out flat to the horizon. I arch above you like a lid. I vanish and return. My name is death. The word extermination resonates, nothing escapes. The world itself ends in a time beyond all time, where time ends, leaving a residue behind of mindless space and still more mindless images, the nightmares that the mind conceals, reveals. To run from time isn't a choice. The stars we see are overwhelming and block the view or bring up images of light and dark, a flickering across the map of time, the flow of sand in dreams. Oh, and by the way, I will put in a plug for this book. I forgot to explain that I believe it's going to be coming out in 2025. It's part of the 2 series, which is American poets being released simultaneously in English and French. So I've been proofing. I proofed the English and I'm proofing the French right now. So I'm excited that that's going to be coming out. So I thought I'd read a few selections from a series called The Mystery of False Attachments, Gathering of Fragments. 1. No world more clear than what we see in dreams, nor more amazing. 2. I open up my mouth and hear a multitude of voices. 3. I aim a question at the universe, but a trillion others answer in its place. 4. Hand in hand, the dead walk in a line, hoping against hope like children. 5. Eager to break the language and touch life, I crack my head against a mirror. 6. A deeper image leaves the world behind, still deeper where time ends, and yet another universe begins, absent all seeing. 7. In the way words rhyme or fail to, I found my truth. 10. I bear 100 names. I sound them one by one, but none rings true. 11. All who die are equal, where a cruel nirvana waits for them, and man's a wolf to man. I thought 19 was nice. 19. Better for the mind to empty out in dreams the way a body falls, thrown from a passing train, forsaken. 20. It doesn't matter if the rhyme is slant or straight. I feel it on my tongue. My eyes see through it. 21. I would have my body dressed in words after I die. I write it out with wires that I read from right to left. 23. I will go on writing until I drop, and you can read my words beyond my caring. 24. If my mouth shuts down, I lose the sound that music makes for me. I cry aloud my final crack at wisdom. 25. The view from paradise appalls me. I turn my back and ponder, fearful to be understood. 26. The voice inside me has another voice behind it. I can hear when dreaming. And I'll do 34 and 35. Oh, shall we let them in? Come on in. Welcome. No problem. 34. I is the worst. I is the first word spoken, slim and long, the perfect particle. It is absent from my speech if I avoid it, but it invades my mind. 35. The calculus of 2 plus 2, the mystery of false attachments still persists. Now, I've asked a special guest to cover the book that Peter was talking about. It's the came out exactly 6 months after my father's death, October 22nd. The Serpent and the Fire is the omnipoetic anthology with Javier Taboada. And we've got Spanish translations and the English. And Jennifer Cooper was instrumental in translating Portuguese for this book. And I thought, who better, since we have her here, to read a selection of the work that she did. So I'm going to step aside for a minute and leave it to her.
So I had the great pleasure of working on the anthology with Javier and Jerome and doing the consulting about the Brazilian section and doing some of the translations. And this translation is one of the serpents of the Serpent in the Fire, and it's Cobra Norato. And Cobra Norato is an enchanted figure of the Amazon. And it's written by Raul Bopp, who was very important in the modernist period. And so this poem talks about how after a trip that Raul Bopp did through the Amazon, how the Cobra Norato has the fame of turning into a man in order to go into parties. And so in this poem, it's the opposite. The speaker of the poem goes into the snake and travels down the Amazon. And so it's a way to have, to present a lot of the figures, enchanted figures, and Amerindian oral tradition. So this is a poem in 33 parts, and I'm just going to read part 2 and 3. And now the encrypted forest begins. Shade hides trees. Thick-lipped frogs spy in the dark. Here a wit of woods is being punished. Saplings squat in the mire. A slow slip of stream licks loam. All I want is to see Queen Luzia's daughter. Now the rivers drown, gulping the path. Water rolls by the marshes, sinking, sinking. Up ahead, sand cradles the footsteps of Queen Luzia's daughter. Ooh-wee, now I'll see her. But first you must pass through 7 doors to see 7 white women with empty wombs guarded by an alligator. All I want is to see Queen Luzia's daughter. You must deliver your soul to Papa Legba, chant on the new moon, and drink 3 drops of blood, only if it's the blood of Queen Luzia's daughter. Immense wilds with insomnia, sleepy trees yawn. At last the night has dried out, river water crashed. I've got to go. I get going willy-nilly deep in the backwoods where ancient pregnant trees are napping. They chide me from all sides. Where you off to, Noratu? Here are 3 sweet saplings just waiting. Can't stay. Today I'll lay with Queen Luzia's daughter. 3. I tear off burning sand. Pokeweed scratches me. Fat shafts play sink in the mud. Twigs psst as I pass. Leave me alone. I got a long way to go. Nut sedges block the way. Oh, Kurupira, whose evil eye has cursed me and reversed my tracks on the ground. I slither withered, searching for Queen Luzia's daughter. I coil up for the night. Earth sinks away. Bog, soft belly roll, swallows me whole. Which way should I take? My blood aches, spellbound by Queen Luzia's daughter. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm going to take a half step back, and I think that this poem, to me, growing up, going to these poetry readings, this is sort of definitive Jerome Rothenberg. And I'm going to do it in the English, and then Ariel Resnikoff is going to take over and do the Yiddish, which another bit of trivia. If you don't know, my dad's first language was Yiddish until he was like 4 years old. So it's close to the bone. And so are the themes in this poem. It's called Poland, 1931, The Wedding. My mind is stuffed with tablecloths and with rings, but my mind is dreaming of Poland, stuffed with Poland, brought in the imagination to a black wedding, a naked bridegroom hovering above his naked bride. Mad Poland, how terrible thy Jews at weddings, thy synagogues with camphor smells and almonds, thy thermos bottles, thy electric fogs, thy braided armpits, thy underwear alive with roots. Oh, Poland, 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 Poland. How thy bells wrapped in their flowers toll, how they do offer up their tongues to kiss the moon, old mother stuck in thy sky, thyself, an old bell with no tongue, a lost udder. O Poland, thy beer is ever made of rotting bread. Thy silks are linens merely. Thy tradesmen dance at weddings where fanatic grooms still dream of bridesmaids, still are screaming past their red mustaches, Poland. We have lain awake in thy soft arms forever. Thy feathers have been balm to us. Thy pillows capture us like sickly wombs and guard us. Let us sail through thy fierce weddings, Poland. Let us tread thy markets where thy peppercorns grow ripe and full. Let us bite thy peppercorns. Let thy oxen's dung be sugar to thy dying Jews. O Poland, O sweet, resourceful, restless Poland. O Poland of the saints, unbuttoned Poland, repeating endlessly the triple names of Mary. Poland, 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 Poland. Have we not tired of thee, Poland? No, for thy cheeses shall never tire us, nor the honey of thy goats. Thy grooms shall work ferociously upon their looming brides, shall bring forth executioners, shall stand like kings inside their doorways, shall throw their arms around thy lintels, Poland, and begin to grow.
Polen, 1931. Die Chassene. Mein Milch ist ungestoppt mit Tischtecher und mit Fingerlich, aber mein Milch cholmt von Polen, ungestoppt mit Polen in Dimmen gebracht zu einer schwarzen Chassene. Ein nacketer Chossen schwebt über sein nackete Kalle, mit triffedicke Polen wie schreckliche deine Jiden, auf Chassenes deine Schulen mit Kampfer, Reiches und Mandeln, deine Thermossen, deine elektrische Tumanen, deine Unterwäsche lebendig mit Wurzeln, oi, Polen, 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 Polen. Wie deine Glocken ungewickelt mit Blumen klingen, wie sie öffnen ihre Zungen zu kuschen die Levone. Alte Levone, alte Mama geblieben, stecken in dein Himmel, du allein. Ein alte Glock und a Zung, feilleurene Äther, oi, Peulen, dein Bier ist tummet gemacht von verfeultete Bräut. Deine Seiden ist leibend bloß, deine Schorim tanzen auf Chassenes. Vuchasonim, Kanoim, Fantasieren noch wegen Kalles schreiendike noch durch sehr Reute Wonses Polen. Wir seien geblieben wach in deine Weiche Arem oif ewig. Deine Federn seien gewinn vor uns Balsam. Deine Kischens fangen uns wie kränkliche Trachten und hinten uns. Lo mir durchsegeln deine Vliden, Kassenes Beulen, lo mir tretten. Deine Märkten, wo deine Wursten wachsen, reif und voll. Lo mir beißen deine Pfefferkorns. Soll dein Ochsenmist sein Zucker für deine geistige Jiden. Oi Peulen, oi süße, zuchedigte, unruhigte Peulen. Oi Peulen von der heilige, unnäpplitige Peulen, überchassendike und eufer die dreidike Namen von Maria. Peulen, 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 Peulen. Seien mir nicht mit geworden von dir, Peulen, nein, weil deine Käsen wollen uns keinmal nicht mitmachen und nicht die Honig von deinen Ziegen. Deine Chussens wollen arbeiten, so dich über sehr schwebedicke Kalles, wollen kindeln mit Henker, wollen ständen wie Königin in deine Tieren, wollen Arum nehmen, deine beitschliche Peulen und anheben, kreien. Well, I'd like to first say happy birthday to Jerry. It's Jerry's birthday, 93rd birthday today. He would have been 93 today. And yeah, I've done this twice. We did it at St. Mark's, and this is the second time that on my way here, I thought, oh, but Jerry and Diane are missing, you know. Diane is in San Diego. She's still with us, thank God, but thank Goddess. But Jerry, you know, my experience of this place is always with Jerry. So, and at the motorhome hotel around the corner and getting the pork liver conchi at the Chinese restaurant. Many good memories with Jerry and Diane in North Beach. So I'm going to read a couple things from a couple different registers. I'll start with a poem of mine for Jerry from this book, A Natural Bird Migrator, which he had great influence. And then I'll read one of Jerry's poems from Vienna Blood, a poem for Paul Celan in memory. He met Celan in 1967 when he was, after he had actually translated, but the first time they were meeting and to talk about the translations. And Celan had been translating Mandelstam. And I gave a talk on this poem at a conference in Montreal not long before Jerry passed away. And I gave a talk with someone who was giving a talk on Mandelstam, and we realized that Mandelstam is actually a part of this poem. I had never seen it before. We realized that he's talking to Celan about his translations of Mandelstam, and then he writes this poem in memory of Celan translating Mandelstam. So I'll read that. It's called A Poem for Paul Celan in Memory. And then I'll end with a poem that he and I wrote together across languages. We wrote this poem. This is a piece of it. We wrote a long poem over email together bilingually. We went back and forth between Yiddish and English, and then we translate it both ways. So there's no original language. It's written in both languages. And Jerry especially was tickled by that. He liked that there was no originary language, that the poem was written in translation. I'll start with this poem for Jerry from this book, A Natural Bird Migrator. It's from a suite of poems called Yinglasia. Yinglasia. Acute pain for Jerome Rothenberg. Acute pain, usually appearing as oy vey's mir, literally woe is me, the stuff and nonsense air, so you say, literally know from what. And crawling ache, slang, literally wandering Jew, and never stop to itch. But whom are you kidding, literally what's the joke? And whom are you fooling, literally who are you fucking over this time? When I eat my anti-Semites, I'll chew them out myself. They're Jews like me. I'm hell on earth to them, gaping as a pit, literally, where the devil sits to say his morning prayers. Get killed, they recite in communal prayer. Drop dead, get lost, go choke yourself. Who knows, who could have believed to be ruined as such, literally inflected? How's business? How's tricks? What's your name, huh? What's your mother's name? How come? How much? A wild one you want. What else? What's it matter to me, huh? What are you talking my head off? Watch out, literally, to throw one's eye. What a sober carries on his lung, a drunk struts. But what's the difference? Capable of, literally, what's on his tongue and all in the cards. But what's the trick? Literally, what's cooking? A wound of bologna. Literally, fried sausage cheese noodle. What a viezo. Slavic, literally, fool named for Haman's youngest son. The Jews' vooz, literally, blew the Dybbuk tongue away, and when sleeping, later cut it out. Photographs of the tongue are posted on the study hall's walls to mark the day. I'll just say one other thing about this Ceylon poem of Jerry's. Part of this meeting with Ceylon is that he didn't know that Ceylon spoke Yiddish, and Ceylon didn't know that he spoke Yiddish. So the meeting, as he said, as he told me, maybe he told you this also, took place mostly in broken German and broken English, because Jerry could translate German, but he couldn't speak German comfortably like he spoke Yiddish. It wasn't Mameluschen. And Ceylon obviously was completely fluent in German, but was fully fluent in Yiddish also, and it had been a kind of co-Mameluschen for him. I think his father had spoken Yiddish to him, his mother had spoken German to him. And he said at the end of the meeting, they realized that they both spoke Yiddish. And then, as Jerry said, there wasn't that much more left to say after that. And so this is a poem in memory of Paul Ceylon, of Jerry's, from 1975, in memory of their meeting in 67, in memory of Ceylon translating Mandelstam. And I see it as this kind of, one of the parts of the poem in Mandelstam that's translated is the ziv, which is this Hebrew word, which means a kind of intergenerational light. And I see these figures translating each other and moving across time against all odds, you know. I mean, when you think about what any of these people were up against. A letter to Paul Ceylon in memory of how your poems arise in me, alive, my eye fixed on your line, light was salvation. And that's Mandelstam, actually. I remember in simpler version, Paris, 1967, in cold light of our meeting, shivered to dumbness. You said Jew and I said Jew, though neither spoke the Jew words, Jew tongue, neither the mother language, Lushan, the vestiges of holy speech. But you said pain under your eyebrows. I said image. We said sound, and turned around to silence lost between two languages. We drank wine's words like blood, but didn't drink toward. Vision still, we could not speak without a scream, a guttural, the tree. Out of the shadow of the white cafe was not the tree. Roots of our speech, above us in the sun, under the sewers, language of the moles who dig and dig, do not grow wise, who make no song, no language, into the water silence of your death. The pink pale sky of Paris in the afternoon that held no constellations, no knowledge of the sun as candelabrum, tree, menorah, light nodded into air with table set, chairs empty in Sabbath splendor. The old man stood beside in a figure of a woman, raised his arms to reach. Axis of the world would bring the air down solidly and speak no sound, the way you forced my meaning to your poem, the words of which still press into my tongue. Drunk, blessed, gebenched. And I'll just close with this excerpt of a poem of Jerry's and mine. It's called The Paradise of Hearing. It begins with an epigraph from the Yiddish modernist poet Michal Licht, who Jerry and I had a shared kindred affiliation with. A poem beginning with 2 lines by Licht. That was the alternative title also. A Paradise of Hearing. Ascent to a paradise of hearing. Breathe hell on the molding of the dreamt ladder. And I'll read the English, but it's equally English as it is Yiddish. Both are host languages of a translational poem. Like dirt between our teeth, the smell of words, angry and bare, smacks of the streets they come from, where new and old wares we sold out to genteel tongues, dried and pickled. In casks, what we drink first taints our mouths, but fails to raise us further once the dream explodes in shotness smells and boiling trafe over noodles on the stove and pork tongues, prayer and catfish proverb carries smell of distant holes and hovels, men in fur-trimmed hats and cracked galoshes and pools of hot, cold bathing babes emerge, toiveled and ruddy in muddy streets. Oh, little angels, arms slashed at the wrist, opening their jaws in craws. In klezmer chorus to what murder follows, 4 crows gather and glean with Gentile Zionist beaks, not dreamt, never, never far from any home the homeboy can confess to in the star-struck fable town, the first, the last Shigets, alive, surviving in basement attics, on leaves of jargon alone, with nowhere out but the sky. I too and you, in late or latter day imaginings to make a new supreme, surreal, and lonely only Jewish vaudeville. The archipelago actors we cast in red string across a chain link stage, their teeth and tongues wading in mad Galician mud, brought wholesale onto 2nd Avenue in Kingdom's West, a world of cafeterias and stinky fish heads, scratchy records bouncing on their scratchy phonographs, from which the fathers fled, leaving a residue behind. Thank you. And next is Gary Gach.
What a honor. My attempt to be short and simple will probably be one continuous mistake, but I'll give it a try. How many people have ever read an anthology that has something by Albert Einstein? Do you know the piece? It's entitled E, and it goes like this: MC². I mean, who else? This is from Exiled in the Word, Poems and Other Visions of the Jews from Tribal Times to Present. So I want to give a very simple, brief, personal tribute to Jerry, and then a experiment in omnipoetics. So 1964, the German poet's book had been out for 5 years, but I wasn't really, I didn't know what was going on. I was young, and a fellow writer, a little older than me now, still writing and also a flamenco teacher, La Mariana Mejia, introduced me to deep image. And this was when I was more conversant with no ideas, but in things and Zen. But deep image is no things, but in ideas. And a little later, I think it was through George and Mary, I met Jerry at the Poetry Center, where he read, I remember vividly, Cockboy, which is cowboy with a K instead of a W. And around that time, I was knocking on the door of translation, and he befriended me and mentored me throughout the rest of our time together. And I was fortunate to donate some work in some of these anthologies, of which The Fire and the Serpent is the crowning achievement of someone who continually brought fire, who nobly was a rainmaker when it was needed, and kept advancing his agenda, sort of like revising and then putting two things together so he could stand and look up above that. And that's what this one truly makes much a case for, as being so. Translation for Jerry, as you may know, was everything. Everything's translation. There's no original language. Everything's a second language. You're translating the sound of my voice into images and thoughts. So for him, it was extensive, and then he would have an agenda. For example, for a while, it was ethnopoetics, Kabbalah, and Dada. But they weren't separate things. He could find the modern Dada within Kabbalah, and he could find within Dada a Kabbalah. And so, he has this kind of like systems approach that's working on like 9 cylinders at once or something. And I could do the blindfold test. You give me a poem, it's Jerry Rothenberg. You show me a translation, that's Jerry Rothenberg. You show me an anthology or a comment, that's Jerome Rothenberg. And in this new anthology, gathering, potlatch, call it what you will, there is a manifesto, which I'd like to read. This is what I'm going to read of his tonight. The first 2 of the Omnipoetics Manifesto. 1. Omnipoetics as a rejection of the idea of a canon or any state of mind or spirit that defines poetry as a hierarchy of high and low forms, separating verse and prose, sound and image, written and oral, voice and gesture, poetry and philosophy, etc., while recognizing individual works of genius in all of these categories. 2. Omnipoetics as an attempt to create a horizontal corpus of works that can facilitate a mutual communication across borders, bringing it all into a continually expanding symposium of the whole. So this is my experiment in omnipoetics. 2 translations from Tang Dynasty, Chinese, and I'll just do, from one to the other. He had published some of the stuff in Technicians, the shaman poems and some folk songs. Tang Yen Shi of Chen Chang became a recluse on Juhua Mountain. One night, he took a walk in the forest. Following the mountain torrent and coming towards him, there was a man, getting on in years, in a white robe and with a silk band around his head, a beautiful stranger. As he was serenely walking along, he could be heard to be chanting poetry. Mr. Tang was about to speak to him when suddenly he vanished. The next day, Mr. Tang was talking to some villagers. Someone knew whom he meant and told him. That must have been Mr. Wu, who'd passed the civil exam and got a high degree. He was good at composing poetry, but he died several years ago. Chanting in an endless roar, crashing mountain torrents, swelling streams overflow their bonds in wild blossoms everywhere. From here, I go to there and back alone, unbeknownst to anyone, returning to face moonlit mountain wilderness alone. Deer Park by Wong Wei. Mountain wilderness all alone. Only human talk's echoes audible. Reversal of shade to sun from behind, now ahead, on into forest depths. Ascending the empty hills, jade moss, afterglow. And our next guest is Robert Haas.
Thank you. One story about Jerry. There's an annual festival of environmental poetry in Berkeley in a park, and I asked him, we had no money to offer him, if he would come once and read, and he generously did. There were a bunch of kids, 10, 11, 12, reading their poems, and they got up with a piece of paper shaking and read their poems, and various stuff was going on. Jerry went over after and introduced himself to them and asked to see their poems, and started coaching them on how to read their poems. It was busy. I was going around doing other things, but the next time I passed by, the kids were there like that, tapping their toes and reading their poems to each other. The Poland poems were written 50 years ago, Oh Poland. And 40 years ago, Jerry went to Poland and came back and wrote the second part of what became Triptych, a poem after the experience of visiting the village that his family came from. And I thought it would be interesting to for you to hear that, his account of that. In 1987, I was a decade more past Poland, 1931. I went to Poland for the first time, into the small town of Ostrów Mazowiecka, 60 miles northeast of Warsaw, from which my parents had come in 1920. The town was there, and the street, Miodowa, meaning honey, was my father's parents, where my father's parents had a bakery. I hadn't realized that the town was only 15 miles from Treblinka, but when we went there, as we had to, there was only an empty field and thousands of large stones that made up the memorial. We were the only ones there, except for a group of 3 people, another family perhaps, who seemed to be picnicking at the site. This was a sharp contrast to the crowds of tourists at Auschwitz and to the fullness of the other Poland I had once imagined. The absence of the living seemed to create a vacuum in which the dead, the Dybbuk's who had died before their time, were free to speak. It wasn't the first time that I thought of poetry as the language of the dead, but never so powerfully as now. Those in my own family had died without a trace, with one exception, an uncle who had gone to the woods with a group of Jewish partisans and who, when he heard that his wife and children were murdered at Treblinka, drank himself blind in a deserted cellar and blew his brains out. That, anyway, was how the story had come back to us a long time before I had ever heard a word like Holocaust. It was a word with which I never felt comfortable, too Christian and too beautiful, too much smacking of a sacrifice I didn't and still don't understand. The word with which we spoke of it was the Yiddish Hebrew word korban. And it was this word that was, for me, was with me all the time we stayed in Poland. When I was writing Poland in 1931, at a great distance from the place, I decided deliberately that that was not to be a poem about the Holocaust. There was a reason for that, I think, as there is now for allowing my uncle's korban to speak through me. The poems that I first began to hear at Treblinka are the clearest message I've ever received about why I write poetry. They are an answer only to the proposition by Adorno and others that poetry cannot or should not be written after Auschwitz. Our search since then has been for the origin of poetry, not only a willful desire to wipe the slate clean, but as a recognition of those other victories and the scraps of poems they left behind. I'm sorry, victories, good Lord. But a recognition of those other victims and the scraps of poems they left behind them in the mud. Which leads into, I'll just read a couple of them. In the dark word korban, all their lights went out. Their words were silences, memories drifting along the horse roads over Malinker Street. A disaster in the mother's tongue, her words emptied of speaking, returning to a single word, the child word, spoken, red-eyed on the frozen pond, was how they spoke it, how I could take it from their voice and cradle it, that ancient and dark word. Those who spoke it in the old days, those who spoke it in the old days now hold their tongue. Passing Chelmno on the main road, driving past it. In May, along the road to Warsaw, little ghosts of Lidice, town in Poland. Row of peasants cutting up the earth on bended knees. Man spiffs up a roadside shrine, leaving a bunch of tacky flowers. Little figures bathing in the river. Little thought of what was there before. The reader after me is Brenda Hillman, and she's not here, and asked me to read what she was going to read. She came down with a cold. This speaks to the incredible influence of Jerry. She wanted to point out, there are kids, she visited a class at Columbia University, and the student poets were writing Bantu combinations, an intervention into American poetry from a French Jesuit who spent time among the Bantu people and wrote down some of their work songs, which Jerry translated into the Technicians of the Sacred, which are now exercises in poetry like haiku for American students. Here's a couple of Bantu combinations. I'm still carving an ironwood stick. I'm still thinking about it. The lake dries up at these were work songs that somebody would cry out one phrase, and then a another person had to come up with a phrase that had some subtle and interesting association with the first phrase. So ironwood is very hard wood. It's hard to carve. So carving it is like obsession. One guy says, I am still carving an ironwood stick. The other guy says, I'm still thinking about it. This one is, one guy says, the lake dries up at the edges. The other guy says, the elephant was killed by a very small arrow, and so on. One of his inventions. The one she wanted me also to read is the Navajo, the night chant. Jerry found this because Washington Matthews, who was an Irish-born surgeon in the 7th Cavalry, John Ford and John Wayne's 7th Cavalry, taught himself Navajo, but he'd also passing through Redwall Whitman, which gave him a prosody in which to make this part of American literature. In the house made of dawn, in the house made of evening twilight, in the house made of dark cloud, in the house made of rain and mist, of pollen, of grasshoppers, where the dark mist curtains the doorway, the path to which is on the rainbow, where the zigzag lightning stands high on top, where the he-rain stands high on top. Oh, male divinity, with your moccasins of dark cloud, come to us. With your mind enveloped in dark cloud, come to us. With the dark thunder above you, come to us soaring. With the shapen cloud at your feet, come to us soaring. With the far darkness made of the dark cloud over your head, come to us soaring. With the far darkness made of the rain and mist over your head, come to us soaring. With the zigzag lightning flung out high over your head, with the rainbow hanging high over your head, come to us soaring. With the dark, far darkness made of the rain and the mist on the ends of your wings, come to us soaring. With the far darkness of the dark cloud on the ends of your wings, come to us soaring. With the zigzag lightning, with the rainbow high on the end of your wings, come to us soaring. With the near darkness made of the dark cloud of the rain and the mist, come to us. With the darkness of the earth, come to us. You would swear Jerome Rothenberg was Navajo. The next reader is Amy McClure.
Jerome Rothenberg. Generosity, intelligence, kindness, sharp sight, insight, humor, joy, anger, justly directed, moving the world with a laugh, unique, opening portals to a wider horizon, a deeper experience of ourselves. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Diane. I think I first met Jerry and Diane down the street around the corner in front of Tomaso's on the sidewalk. Early dinner before a reading at City Lights. And I think at that reading, Jerry, probably the first reading I saw of Jerry's, the first time I met Jerry, he did one of the horse songs, the Navajo horse songs of Frank Mitchell, probably number 13, White. It moved me, it moved the audience. None of us were touching the chair, we all levitated. Many years later, in an interview with Colin Still of London, Jerry says, before reading the 13th, he said, music in his translations of the horse songs of Frank Mitchell, the Navajo horse songs, he says, the music is not Navajo, the words are not Navajo, the sounds are not Navajo, and the source, as in the case of translation, is Navajo. Generous spirit, deeply kind, intelligent, curious, supportive, collaborative. Visiting his home in Southern California, there were 2 cats living in the house. We saw one briefly. The other one, Jerry and Diane said they've only seen once, but they know the cat lives in the house. And Jerry said something. There were two things about that house. One was the cats. The other thing was we stayed, I believe, in Matthew's room. And the entire wall was a painting of Guernica, which you and your friends did when you were 9 or 10, something like that. 15. Amazing. Just amazing. And it's the fresco, I mean, the whole wall. Let your kids paint the walls. The cat, Jerry said, it's good to have a mammal other than humans sharing your home to remind us that we're all mammals. And in that, he shared with his dear friend, Michael McClure, my partner for many years. He shared that belief. And from Mephistos, Michael wrote a poem for Jerry, probably in 2015 or 2016. It's called Skaggy the Salmon for Jerome Rothenberg, after a Haida drawing by Bill Reed. So imagine one of those Northwest Haida drawings of Skaggy the salmon. For Jerry, within the faces of hunger are faces of hunger, within faces of hungers and tadpoles, and teeth surging towards souls they devour and nibble, and chase laughing through waves into the air, following the great face of jaws and smiles and growls on the powerful tail. Fins of lives turn to sunset over misty islands as we speed to the features of love, always alight as we create delight ahead. Crumbs of meat in the wake. This is the truth of the half lie, speedily moving with no splashes. Even the adipose fin has an eye. No reason to cry, for life is coming and going. Thank you, Jerry.
And then we have Michael Palmer.
Happy to be in this company and to celebrate Jerry and Diane. Matthew reminds me that, and to celebrate City Lights, we'd be nowhere without it up here. Matthew reminds me that my first experience of City Lights was in 1963. I came down from the Vancouver Poetry Conference with Allen Ginsberg and Phil Whalen and a number of other people. And Allen took me immediately to City Lights. Among other things, I was given access to the dirty room where they had already been sued, I think, for Howl. And so it was a very expensive thing. And they were very brave about that, and it worked out. But nonetheless, they kept some of the problematic stuff downstairs in a room behind a locked door. One of the things I came out with was Dark Brown by Michael McClure. Wonderful. And I had also, in Salt Lake City, on the way driving out that summer from Cambridge, Massachusetts, had found another of Michael's books, which I think I stole from a bookstore in Salt Lake City. Don't quote me. Anyway, I was getting the sense of that thing, of that sense of community. And interplay that Jerry came so stunningly to represent in my life and so many others. I wrote a little thing here, and then I'll read a couple of brief things. Well, for Jerry and always Diane, where do we begin? When asked, Gertrude Stein once famously said, "We begin at the beginning, go on until the end, then stop," or something close to that. Unfortunately, our limited time does not allow for such an approach, but I'll try to briefly celebrate Jerry's meaning to me personally across the years. I remember that it was in the winter of 1963-64 that Leroy Jones, soon to become Amiri Baraka, and I went one evening to the Half Note on Spring Street to hear John Coltrane and his magnificent quartet during that period that Coltrane was first making his extended explorations on soprano sax. 2 long sessions with 1 break, ending somewhere around 1:30 or 2 in the morning. Coltrane performing solos that went on forever, but never too long. In an interview around that time, when asked about these solos, Coltrane said that he was, quote, looking for the door. It struck me that this was exactly what I was searching for in an effort to find my way to an alternative life to that which had been proposed for me, a life in the company of poets and like-minded folk, a new life, maybe such as Dante had once proposed. And now I realize that Leroy was searching as well for a life beyond downtown Bohemia that the Black Arts movement would soon help make possible. Which brings me to the many doors that Jerry opened for us in our effort to find a way towards something vital and new, some path not yet taken or even known. Jerry, as neo-Dada performer, taking on the persona of Tristan Tzara or Sami Rosenstock, as he had been known before he too took an alternate path. Jerry as translator, bringing parallel worlds into view, forging a dialogue between self and other and self as other, foregrounding cultures heretofore excluded by the usual institutional orthodoxies. Contact and multiple conversations, innovative and esoteric strains of song sounding across time. The project then continuing with his many groundbreaking and visionary anthologies that did no less than reconfigure the cultural map, redraw its vectors, and celebrate a range of poetic accomplishment that was at once atemporal and international, defying boundaries or limits or proscriptions, and erasing the conventional Anglo-American cultural timelines. These served and serve now as guides for those of us interested in erasing borders and eliminating border guards, and in coming to understand a visionary tradition in defiance of the warmongers and culture mongers and profiteers. And then I cannot help but emphasize the immediate, intense humanity that Jerry and Diane offered in their everyday lives, their generosity in countless matters, and their commitment to deep fellow feeling. What the arts fully committed to will bring to our sense of that company I mentioned above. A shared cabaret Voltaire in the various ways we always try to imagine it. Ecstatic singers on the stage, good food and wine shared at table, yet never forgetful of the darker forces pulling us towards division and hatred of the other, that bigotry that never seems to wane throughout history, that war against the universal life of the imagination and creative growth. Countless doors opened, no admission fee. I'll finish by reading a piece of mine written for Diane and Jerry many years back, and that first appeared in a book of mine called Notes for Echo Lake. Then something from the third volume of Poems for the Millennium, edited by Jerry along with Jeffrey C. Robinson. A dream called the House of Jews for JR and DR. Many gathered, many friends, maybe everyone. Many now and then may have entered. The ivory teeth fell from her mouth, the typewriter keys. Many fell then at the entrance, many held them, many fell forward and aware. Various friends gathered at the entrance, some held back. The room contains a question. Many said now, before then, this, then that. The room contains a question to be named. He said, I will tell the book, the dream, the words told me. The room is not the place or the name. I remember someone asking, well, what the hell does that mean? And I remembered an anecdote about Robert Browning. He was asked about the meaning of his sordello, which was extraordinarily opaque. And he said, once God and I knew the meaning of the sordello. Now only God knows. And now a poem that seems to foreground nonsensical delight. My wife and I are both great fans of Edward Lear. And so this from the third volume of Poems for the Millennium. How pleasant to know Mr. Lear. Kathy's kind of put me in mind too. That's right. Yes. Of course. Yeah, he takes on many personae. How pleasant to know Mr. Lear, who has written such volumes of stuff. Some think him ill-tempered and queer, but a few think him pleasant enough. His mind is concrete and fastidious. His nose is remarkably big. His visage is more or less hideous. His beard, it resembles a wig. He has ears and 2 eyes and 10 fingers, leastways if you reckon 2 thumbs. Long ago he was one of the singers, but now he is one of the dumbs. He sits in a beautiful parlor with hundreds of books on the wall. He drinks a great deal of Marsala, but never gets tipsy at all. He has many friends, laymen and clerical. Old Foss is the name of his cat. His body is perfectly spherical. He weareth a runcible hat. When he walks in a waterproof white, the children run after him so, calling out, he's come out in his nightgown, that crazy old Englishman, oh. He weeps by the side of the ocean. He weeps on the top of the hill. He purchases pancakes and lotion and chocolate shrimps from the mill. He reads, but he cannot speak Spanish. He cannot abide ginger beer. Ere the days of his pilgrimage vanish, how pleasant to know Mr. Lear. I believe the next reader is Mashan Win. Next person after that would be Andrew Schelling.
Well, Jerome Rothenberg, what you have wrought. You know, Bob, I'm glad you recited a few of those Bantu combinations. 50 years ago, one stuck in my ear from that anthology. The sound of a cracked elephant tusk, the anger of a hungry man. While I was jotting down some notes about, things to say this evening, I suddenly realized everything I've ever tried to do with poetry or have done has really been due to Jerome Rothenberg. And I want to say a word about that just for a second. In 1974, I enrolled at UC Santa Cruz and signed up for a course called Introduction to Poetry, which was taught by a post-Freudian, post-Marxist, classic scholar turned sort of poet, Norman O'Brown. And the fact that he taught this course saved me, of course, from a curriculum that would be maybe the Norton Anthology of English Literature. And he put on our textbooks were two books. Jerry Rothenberg's Technicians of the Sacred, and the book that had been released a year before, Jerry Rothenberg and George Quash's America, a Prophecy. And Norman O'Brown had the small group of us undergraduates meet once a week in a meadow where we would read poetry aloud, really feeling out the phonemes and the syllables and the words and the lines and feeling them go through our voices and our bodies. And we weren't really allowed to talk about the poems, certainly not paraphrase them or try to analyze them. It was really much more about feeling the poems as they came through. These anthologies really brought me into a view of poetry that was, let me say it this way, a poetry that was neither nationalist in outlook, nor restricted to a single language, nor up to date. It was raw, physical, cross-cultural, multilingual. So, Technicians of the Sacred has poems rendered from the Gabon Pygmy, from Tamil, from Ojibwa, from Tibetan, and all these alongside North American contemporaries. So I would read, say, Frances Densmore's translations of Teton Sioux songs, in which she rendered one word of Sioux by one line in English against the abrupt stops and starts of Robert Creeley poems. Or there'd be Ishmael Reed laid up against Aztec definitions, or Gertrude Stein against Papago naming ceremonies. And it really sort of opened up a world that was, I would say, immunized me from what Jack Spicer called the English department of the soul. Of course, reciting all those poems reminds me of one of Jerry's early collaborators on his journal Al Karinga, Dennis Tedlock, who said something like, in an oral tradition, the only way to achieve the hermeneutical task of understanding a story is to perform it. And I think that may be, as much an indication of Jerry Rothenberg's view. This, of course, brings right into the center of things translation, these anthologies. And I've met over my life elder poets, some of them really quite accomplished, who have tried to dissuade younger people from translation with the view that if you translate too much, you might be pegged as a translator rather than an original poet. And a few of them have even spoken of the sort of tragedy of being recognized as translator too early. Somewhere I picked out of Jerry's books a wonderful list of translators he thought were important to world culture. And the three that I remember from his list were Shakespeare, Ezra Pound, and Marpa, who some of you may know, the Tibetan translator. I went out to Colorado from the Bay Area in 1990 and joined the faculty of, then it was called the Naropa Institute. And a year or two later, Jerry came for the summer writing program, and I got to know him there. And once we walked out to get lunch together, and as we were walking down Arapahoe Avenue, he said, "Naropa has changed." And this was summertime on Arapahoe Avenue, trees and leaf. And I said to him, "How?" "It used to be mostly beet," he said. "Now it seems more Black Mountain." "Uh-huh. How do you see the difference?" For the beats, the poet's personality is at the center of the poem. With Black Mountain, the poem has no center. The personality is one of a number of forces, he told me. So I've always sort of, kept that in view when I think of translation and poetry. I want to read one of his pieces from the great translator Marpa, as appears in Technicians of the Sacred. Jerry called this the Annunciation. A man born from a flower in space, a man riding a colt foaled from a sterile mare. His reins are formed from the hair of a tortoise. A rabbit's horn for a dagger, he strikes down his enemies. A man without lips who is speaking, who sees without eyes, a man without ears, who listens, who runs without legs. The sun and the moon dance and blow trumpets. A young child touches the wheel of the law, which turns over. Secret of the body, of the word, of the heart of the gods, the inner breath is the horse of the bodhisattvas. Whipped by compassion, it rears, it drives the old yak from the path of madness. Quite a few years after I met Jerry, he included some of my translations in his anthology, Barbaric, Vast, and Wild, which is a collection of what he calls outsider verse, I guess, people who compose poetry without thinking of it as literature or poetry. And that's always sort of interested me. This is one from Old India, Mahakala speaks. And since it's sort of a death poem, this is for Jerry. This lady who cremates the dead, black as a crow, she takes an old corpse and breaks off a thigh bone, takes an old corpse and breaks off a forearm, cracks an old skull and sets it out like a bowl of milk for me to look at. Witless brain, don't you get it? Whatever you do just ends up here. Get finished with karma, finished with rebirth. No more bones of mine on the slag heap. And I'll finish with one of Jerry's renderings from, again, the Tibetan. He called this burial events. And I don't know how many of you have gone to look up the sources that Jerry often drew his poetry from, but he had to go digging far and wide and really remake much of the material he found in order to make it come alive the way he did. That's just one of the remarkable ways that he could work. This is from a book called Omens and Demons of Tibet. And Jerry called it burial events. And he pulled it out of an entire chapter about various magic spells from Tibet, burial events. Bury the skull of a yak. Bury the skull of a black bitch. Hide the skulls of a dog and a pig under a child's bed, or bury a weasel skull there, or a puppy's, or a piglet's. Set out or bury the skulls of a fox, a badger, and a marmot in a cemetery. Bury the heads of a fish and of an otter. Bury the head of a wolf, a horse, or a yak at the border of an enemy's house. Hide the skulls of a man, a dog, and a pig underneath a stupa. Place the skull of a goat or a sheep halfway up a mountain. Bury the skull of a monkey, a parrot, or a bat where people come to hold a meeting. Bury the skulls of a hybrid yak and of a mule somewhere in the country. Bury the skulls of a lynx and a wolf in a pit someone has dug in the center of a city. Thank you, Jerry. We'll all miss you. And Eleni Stecopoulos.
Hi, I'm Eleni Stecopoulos. For so many of us, finding Jerome Rothenberg's books was the beginning of a life in poetry and a way of living in the world. Jerry's genius, energy, kindness, generosity were always in the service, not just of poetry, but all poesis, all artists everywhere, known by many names. When I found Symposium of the Whole, edited by Jerry and Diane, before I entered graduate school, I made it my curriculum, a place where Marx, Blake, Césaire, Maria Sabina, Malinowski, and Scott Momaday, Elaine Pagels, and so many others were placed in conversation. Symposium of the Whole showed me that one might be a scholar in a way that was embodied and diasporic and rebellious against the national and chronological divisions which stratified the study of literature. When I had the opportunity to become Jerry's student formally in San Diego, Jerry and his characteristic generosity encouraged me instead to go to Buffalo, where there was, in his words, a gathering of poets. Along with my mentors there, Charles Bernstein and Dennis Tedlock, Jerry was a third mentor. He was indeed the mentor or the associate and friend and collaborator of my mentors. And Jerry was one of the people, perhaps even the chief person, who made my own books exploring language as medicine and the poetics of healing possible. Whereas philology and anthropology arose out of colonial rationales as sciences of man or human sciences, but which excluded much of the world from the human, ethnopoetics, as an epistemological field, was born out of the knowledge that every language is complex and has multiple lives. Poetics are multiple. So ethnopoetics has functioned as a critique of the sciences of man. It said to me that poetry is not an abstraction, but fully embodied in all aspects of human production. For me, it has been a sustaining ethics of engaging with what the philosopher Édouard Glissant called opacity, the irreducibility of every language, every people, the genius of every language and every people. In their statement of intention for the inaugural issue of Al Chiringa, the quote, the first magazine of the world's tribal poetries in 1970, Jerry and Dennis Tedlock wrote of translating and engaging with tribal poetry for its own value, not as ethnographic data to serve others' texts. They encouraged collaboration between poets, ethnologists, what they at the time called songmen, and others, with the ultimate goal, quote, to combat cultural genocide in all its manifestations. Ethnopoetics destabilizes Western metaphysics. For me, it has meant an ongoing project of breaking down the stratifications of magic, science, technology, ritual, anecdote, authority, orality, literacy. Understanding literature as action broke down the hierarchy that ordered the published and the ephemeral, the written and the spoken and the sung, the woven and the painted. And this was in itself healing. If performances could be texts, then texts had multiple lives through performance. If anything could be a text, if there was nothing outside the text, as Jacques Derrida wrote, it was because a text is any weaving of authority, and this could come in any form, through any channel. Everywhere, people invented forms out of repression and limitation. Because they had invented them, that was reason to study them. But, Jerry said, to know what is possible, quote, but to grasp the actual possibilities of writing, as with any other form of language or of culture, it is necessary to know it in all its manifestations, new and old. Does the poem really heal? This is from the preface to a symposium on ethnopoetics in 1975. Does the poem really heal? Or what kind of poem or song or discourse does heal, or sustain contradictions, or turn the mind upside down? To revitalize literature as event was healing. Seeing how orality and literacy are always entwined was healing. It healed my understanding of literature at an early age. I mean, it profoundly altered it. It turned it upside down. It wasn't just that curing events, right? Curative acts were also literature, that Jerry showed that to us, or that language and literature could have therapeutic effects. That was important. But it was also that Jerry's own work, I feel, had a mission of healing at its core, to re-embody literature with voice and event, to re-embody voice with oral literature, and to know so early on how important it is to keep languages alive. Plants keep records of their responses to drought and heat waves. Cells show marks where genes were activated in response to disaster. Through expressive culture, humans keep records of creative response, not just the score of trauma marked on the body, but the new score, directions for performance that enabled them to act otherwise, sense otherwise, speak as other, sing as other, listen as other. If I take the lives of language seriously, if I recognize its criticality, their criticality to sustaining life, then I have to learn something about languages I do not know. I have to learn about verbal arts as part of the web of life. So if we speak of ethnopoetics today, it must also, or they must also be ecopoetics, or perhaps more what Jerry ultimately named as omnipoetics, quote, that tests the range of our threatened humanities wherever found and looks toward an ever greater assemblage of words and thoughts as a singular buttress against those forces that would divide and diminish us, end quote. A body of texts within a living language is an ecopoetics, is an omnipoetics, revitalizing languages, revitalizing the planet, revitalizing our relations, all have to be part of the symposium of now. No one I know, or perhaps very few, want to think with ethnos anymore. For so many, it's a dog whistle or the violence of ethno-supremacy. Ethno-state has entered popular discourse. The myth of the nation that is not ethnic, or the nation of many ethnoi, Walt Whitman's greatest poem, is almost finished in this country, while the myth of a white ethno-state becomes more noxious. But from Jerry, I knew that the ethnos in ethnopoetics did not mean nation as an exclusion. It meant poetries of sources, of ancestors, of the primal and the unknown, of the yet to come, of the excluded and the oppressed, of what people can do together, the new scores they can create, people you do not know, but people you can listen to, people who can show you that a different way is possible. This is from A Further Witness for Anselm Hollow. I, who am dead, call to the living, little brothers, how absurd your walk is, unencumbered, and adrift you run across life's stage. Your words are manacles and cage your mind. I know enough of you to sense your pain. Freely and fiercely I move into a deeper space where none will reach me. In the fall of 2001, I saw Jerry in Buffalo, and I expressed my grief and feeling of despair after September 11th. And Jerry said to me very gently, "We're still here." We find ourselves now in a time of mass death, not only the obvious and horrific by bombs and guns and starvation, but the public secret of all who are sacrificed to the billionaires, to the millions who died needlessly in a pandemic, and many, sadly, more to come. The question of the other is not obsolete or some quaint artifact of exoticism. The other is a question of ethics, not of the exotic or the primitive. It's up to us to carry Jerry's work on in our poetry, our teaching, our speech, and our clamor. In a world that's increasingly fundamentalist, can we sustain contradictions? Can we make a kinship, a different kind of ethnos or ethnopoetics that is not of blood or money? We don't have to understand each other, as Edouard Glissant wrote, to love. We don't have to have anything in common but our death, as Alfonso Lingus says. The poetics of healing is also prefigurative in how we might relate to each other under the conditions of the present world. And I take that from Jerry. Jerry, to me, you are athanatos, as Greeks say about great people. And what you have given us and the world lives on. And I'll end with the book we write continues to be written. Beautiful men and beautiful women come alive. We are at the beginning of a dream someone will have to write. The great book of the century, assembled as dream work. The authors move like children into death, dancing like children. Thank you, Jerry. Matthew Rothenberg.
Thank you, everybody. This was really a special evening. I thought I would wind this up in a very Jerry away with a piece that he closed out a lot of readings with. Harkens back to the days when we lived on the Seneca Reservation. My mother was doing her ethnographic work on the relationship between the Seneca and the Quakers. In the meantime, my father was working with the Seneca and helping to translate their work in this kind of way that we're talking about, this inclusive omnipoetic way. In the process, we ended up getting, we were honorarily adopted. We couldn't be legally adopted because we would get some casino money, I think, if that were to happen. But into the Seneca, my mother and I, because it's matrilineal, we were blue herons. We are blue herons. Actually, our clan cousin is Johnny Cash, so he was also in there. But my father was adopted into the Beaver clan, so that's always been sort of a, if you know some of the poems that he's done about beavers. I think one other detail that I would add to kind of build this up is just we spent a lot of time in the Longhouse. I kind of remember this when I was about 2.5. The Longhouse, the Seneca, where the religious ceremonies would happen. And I remember the false faces coming out. Maybe it's just because they told the story so many times, but I had a bottle in my mouth and I bit through the nipple. It was such a startling moment. But one of the things that the false faces would go around and do was beg for tobacco. So just to kind of give the context there. But anyway, I sort of see this as a little bit of a benediction that my dad would do, and it's I encourage participation if we were to. Everybody wants to catch on. It's I don't think it's too hard to get into the groove. So this is Old Man Beaver's blessing song. All I want's a good 5-cent cigar. Hee hee ho ho, hee hee ho ho, hee hee ho ho. All I want's a good 5-cent cigar. Hee hee ho ho, hee hee ho ho, hee hee ho ho. All I want's a good 5-cent cigar. Hee hee ho ho, hee hee ho ho, hee hee ho ho. All I want's a good 5-cent cigar. Hee hee ho ho, hee hee ho ho, hee hee ho ho. All I want, good 5-cent cigar. Hee hee ho ho, hee hee ho ho, hee hee ho ho. Good 5-cent cigar. Hee hee ho ho, hee hee ho ho, hee hee ho ho. All I want, good 5-cent cigar. Hee hee ho ho, hee hee ho ho, hee hee ho ho. Old Man Beaver's blessing song. Thank you, everybody.